The cool evening breeze swept through Casapeno village, carrying with it the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil that permeated every corner of the settlement. It was the kind of evening that should have brought peace and comfort to the residents, but instead, an unsettling silence had fallen over the small community nestled in the remote countryside of Burkina Faso. At the far edge of the village, Handra's house stood in eerie quietness, its windows dark and its doors firmly shut. The dwelling, once filled with the laughter of children and the warmth of family life, now seemed abandoned and forlorn. Something was terribly wrong, and the villagers could sense it in their bones. Ibrahim Traoré, the respected military commander of the regional scout forces, had positioned his men strategically throughout the village. His scouts maintained a careful perimeter, their eyes scanning every shadow, every movement, ready to respond to any emergency at a moment's notice. Ibrahim was a man of considerable experience, having served in various peacekeeping operations across the region. His weathered face told stories of countless nights spent protecting communities just like this one, and his commanding presence brought a sense of security to even the most dire situations. The evening had been uneventful until Mrs. Rena, a neighbor whose house shared a boundary wall with Handra's property, detected something unusual. A foul, putrid smell had begun wafting from the direction of Handra's compound, growing stronger as the evening progressed. It was not the smell of rotting vegetables or spoiled food. It was something far more sinister, something that made her stomach turn and her instincts scream with alarm. Without hesitation, Mrs. Rena hurried to inform the scouts. Her hands trembled as she explained what she had noticed, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might somehow make the situation more real. Ibrahim received the report with the calm professionalism that had become his trademark. He immediately issued orders for his team to remain on high alert while he personally went to investigate. "Every man to his position," Ibrahim commanded, his voice steady and authoritative. "Maintain constant communication. I want eyes on every entrance, every path, every possible point of entry or exit. Something is wrong here, and we need to be ready for anything." The scouts moved with practiced efficiency, each man taking up his assigned position. They had trained together for years, developing an almost telepathic understanding of each other's movements and intentions. Their discipline was impeccable, their focus unwavering. In the gathering darkness, they became silent sentinels, watching over the village. Ibrahim himself moved through the village streets, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. He knew that the quiet of night often provided cover for deception and danger. Every shadow could conceal a threat, every sound could signal trouble. He had learned through hard experience never to take anything for granted. Mrs. Rena accompanied Ibrahim to the back of Handra's property, pointing toward an old well that stood perhaps 50 meters behind the main house. The smell was overwhelming here, so strong that several of the scouts had to cover their noses with their scarves. Ibrahim's jaw tightened as he surveyed the scene. Whatever had happened here, it was serious. "Secure the area," Ibrahim ordered immediately. "I want a perimeter established around this entire compound. Get the villagers to safety, away from this location. No one approaches without my explicit permission." The military personnel moved swiftly to execute his commands. Within minutes, security cordons were established at multiple points around Handra's property. The well itself was surrounded by a tight ring of scouts, their flashlights creating pools of light in the deepening darkness. Villagers, drawn by curiosity and concern, were gently but firmly moved to safe gathering points away from the immediate area. Ibrahim stood at the edge of the well, peering down into its depths. He could see nothing in the darkness below, but his instincts, honed by years of investigative work, told him that whatever lay at the bottom of that well was the source of the terrible smell. He knew that this was no simple police matter. This situation required military precision, careful planning and meticulous attention to detail. "Listen carefully," Ibrahim addressed his team, his voice carrying the weight of command. "We proceed with extreme caution. Every piece of evidence must be preserved exactly as we find it. Every observation must be recorded. Every movement must be deliberate. If anyone sees or hears anything unusual, report it immediately. Are we clear?" A chorus of affirmative responses came from his men. They understood the gravity of the situation. In cases like this, the slightest mistake could mean the difference between justice and a mystery that would never be solved. The villagers watched from a distance, fear evident in their faces. Children were kept indoors, while adults gathered in small clusters, whispering anxiously to one another. They all knew Handra, a businessman who had lived among them for years, a man with a wife and 2 young children. The fact that his house had been silent for several days, combined with the terrible smell emanating from his property, painted a picture that no one wanted to acknowledge. Ibrahim took a moment to address the gathered villagers, his voice calm and reassuring despite the circumstances. "I know you're all concerned," he said, "and I want you to know that we're going to get to the bottom of this. Whatever has happened here, the truth will come to light, but I need your cooperation. Stay in your homes or in the designated safe areas. Let us do our work, and most importantly, if anyone has any information, anything at all that might be relevant, please come forward immediately." As the evening deepened into night, the only sounds in Kasapano were the chirping of crickets and the soft rustle of water in the distance. Ibrahim and his scouts prepared for what they all knew would be a long and difficult investigation. The commander gathered his team for a briefing, outlining their strategy for examining the well, collecting evidence, and responding to any potential threats. "We document everything," Ibrahim emphasized. "Photographs, written reports, witness statements, everything. When this case goes to court, we need to have an airtight record of our procedures. Lives may depend on what we do here tonight." The scouts began their initial examination of the well's perimeter. The soil around it showed signs of recent disturbance, as if someone had been digging or moving heavy objects. Ibrahim noted these details carefully, ensuring they were photographed and recorded. Every footprint, every disturbed stone, every broken branch, all of it could be crucial evidence. As the team set up portable lighting equipment around the well, the full extent of the scene became visible. Ibrahim could see that the ground had indeed been freshly turned, and there were drag marks leading from the house to the well. His experienced eye told him that they were looking at a crime scene of considerable complexity. "This is just the beginning," Ibrahim murmured to his second-in-command. "Whatever we find down there, it's going to change this village forever. We need to be ready for anything." The night stretched ahead of them, full of dark possibilities and difficult truths waiting to be uncovered. Ibrahim Traoré stood at the center of it all, a figure of authority and competence, ready to guide his team through whatever horrors lay ahead. The investigation into Kasapano incident had officially begun. With the perimeter secured and the initial examination complete, Ibrahim Traoré made the decision to proceed with the recovery operation. The stench from the well had only grown stronger as the night wore on, and every instinct told him that time was of the essence. Whatever was down there had to be brought up and properly examined. "We need rope, hooks, and proper safety equipment," Ibrahim instructed his team. "I want 2 men on the ropes, 2 more as backup, and everyone else maintaining the perimeter. We do this slowly and carefully. If anything seems unstable or dangerous, we stop immediately and reassess." The scouts worked with military efficiency, rigging up a pulley system that would allow them to safely extract whatever was in the well. Ibrahim insisted on using flashlights continuously, both to illuminate the work area and to ensure that no evidence was overlooked in the darkness. As the first rope was lowered into the well, several of the scouts leaned over the edge, directing their flashlight beams downward. What they saw made even these hardened military men recoil slightly. At the bottom of the well were partially submerged in shallow water several large black plastic bags. The shape and size of these bags suggested contents that no one wanted to contemplate. 4 bags, one of the scouts reported quietly to Ibrahim. Large ones. We can't see inside from here, but based on the smell and the shape. I understand, Ibrahim nodded grimly. Proceed with the recovery. Remember, extreme caution. We treat each bag as evidence. No contamination, no damage if we can possibly avoid it. The operation to retrieve the bags was painstaking. Using hooks attached to sturdy ropes, the scouts carefully secured each bag before slowly hauling it up from the depths of the well. The process took over an hour, with Ibrahim personally overseeing every stage. He knew that rushing would only risk losing crucial evidence, or worse, causing the bags to break open and scatter their contents. As each bag was brought to the surface, it was immediately placed on a plastic tarp that had been laid out specifically for this purpose. The scouts maintained a respectful distance, focusing their flashlights on the bags while waiting for further instructions. The villagers, still gathered at a safe distance, watched in horrified fascination. Even from far away, they could guess what those bags might contain. When all 4 bags had been recovered, Ibrahim ordered his men to establish an even tighter security perimeter. No one, and I mean no one, approaches these bags except the forensic team. We keep them exactly as they are until the specialists arrive. Guards will be posted here throughout the night. It was nearly midnight when the forensic team arrived from the regional capital. They had been hastily assembled and transported to Kasapano as soon as Ibrahim had made his initial report. The team consisted of 3 specialists, a medical examiner, a forensic technician, and a photographer. They came equipped with proper protective gear, evidence collection kits, and the expertise needed to handle what was clearly a major crime scene. Ibrahim briefed them quickly but thoroughly, outlining everything that had transpired since Mrs. Rena's initial report. The forensic team listened intently, asking occasional questions and taking notes. When Ibrahim finished, the lead examiner nodded soberly. "We'll need several hours to do this properly," he said. "The bodies, if that's what these bags contain, will need to be examined in situ before we move them to our facility. We'll need your security personnel to maintain the perimeter and keep the area clear."
"You'll have whatever you need," Ibrahim assured him. "My men will stay as long as necessary." The forensic examination began in the early hours of the morning. Working under portable floodlights that had been set up around the work area, the team carefully opened the first bag. What they found confirmed everyone's worst fears. Inside was the body of a man, partially decomposed but still recognizable. The forensic examiner worked methodically, photographing the remains, noting the position of the body, and searching for any identifying features or evidence of trauma. By the time dawn began to break over Kasapano, all 4 bags had been examined. The results were devastating. The bags contained the bodies of Handra, his wife Sulastri, and their 2 young children. But there was something else, a 5th body, that didn't belong to the family. This corpse was that of an unidentified male, his features badly damaged, making immediate identification impossible. Ibrahim received the preliminary report from the forensic team with a heavy heart. He had seen many things in his years of military service, but the murder of children never failed to affect him deeply. He stood for a moment in silence, gathering his thoughts before addressing his team. "This is now officially a multiple homicide investigation," he announced. "I want every possible piece of evidence collected from this scene. The house needs to be thoroughly searched. We need to interview everyone in the village. When was the last time anyone saw this family? Did anyone notice anything unusual? Any strangers in the area? Any disputes or conflicts?" The scouts set to work immediately. Some began a methodical search of Handra's house, carefully documenting everything they found. Others began interviewing villagers, taking detailed statements about the family's last known movements. Ibrahim himself coordinated all these efforts, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. Inside Handra's house, the search team discovered the man's office, which contained financial records, business documents, and personal correspondence. These materials were carefully collected and catalogued. It quickly became apparent that Handra had been involved in some business disputes in recent months. Several names appeared repeatedly in his records, including former employees who had left on less than friendly terms. One name in particular stood out: Reno, a former worker who had apparently been dismissed several months earlier. The record showed financial disagreements between Handra and Reno, with mentions of unpaid wages and damaged equipment. Further investigation revealed that Reno had two known associates, Arfan and Sarai. All three men had worked together in the past, and all three had reason to harbor resentment against Handra. "I want surveillance on all three of these individuals," Ibrahim ordered. "Watch their homes, their workplaces, anywhere they might go. But don't approach them yet, just observe and report. I want to know their movements, who they talk to, where they spend their time. We build our case carefully before we make any moves." As the sun rose over Casapano, the scale of the tragedy became fully apparent. An entire family had been wiped out, and the village would never be the same. But Ibrahim Traoré was determined that whoever committed this horrible crime would be brought to justice. The investigation was just beginning, and he would see it through to the end, no matter how long it took. Over the following days, Ibrahim and his team worked tirelessly to piece together what had happened to Handra and his family. The forensic evidence was carefully analyzed, witness statements were cross-referenced, and surveillance reports on the suspects began to paint a disturbing picture. The medical examiner's report revealed that all 5 victims had been killed by blunt force trauma and stab wounds. The time of death was estimated at approximately 10 days before the bodies were discovered. This meant that Handra and his family had been missing for over a week before anyone thought to check on them, a fact that filled Ibrahim with regret. If someone had raised the alarm sooner, perhaps the crime scene would have been fresher, the evidence more abundant. But there was no point in dwelling on what might have been. Ibrahim focused instead on what could still be done. The surveillance on Reno, Arfan, and Sarai had revealed interesting patterns. All 3 men had been behaving nervously, making frequent phone calls, and meeting in secluded locations. Arfan, in particular, seemed agitated, constantly looking over his shoulder as if expecting to be followed. It was during one of these surveillance operations that Ibrahim's team caught a break. One of the scouts reported seeing Arfan meeting with a woman at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. The woman was identified as Ronnie, a former domestic worker who had been employed by both Handra and Arfan at various times. After Arfan left, the scout approached Ronnie and convinced her to speak with Ibrahim. Ronnie was a small, timid woman, in her 30s, clearly frightened by the attention from military personnel. Ibrahim met with her in a secure location, ensuring her safety before beginning his questions. He knew that witnesses often held the keys to solving complex cases, and his years of experience had taught him the importance of gaining their trust. "Ronnie, I need you to understand something," Ibrahim began gently. "You're not in trouble, but I believe you have information that could help us solve a very serious crime. Several people are dead, including 2 young children. If you know anything at all, about what happened, now is the time to tell me." Ronnie was silent for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Finally, she began to speak. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear to God, I didn't know what they were planning." Her story emerged slowly, punctuated by sobs and long pauses. She explained that several weeks earlier, Arfan had contacted her asking for information about Handra's schedule and movements. Arfan had told her that he needed to settle a business dispute, nothing more. Ronnie had known both men, and hadn't thought much of the request. She had innocently provided Arfan with details about when Handra was typically at home, when his wife took the children to school, and other routine information. "I thought he just wanted to talk to him," Ronnie said desperately. "I thought maybe they could work out their problems. I never thought—" Ibrahim listened carefully, taking detailed notes. "Did Arfan ever mention Reno or Saray?" he asked. Ronnie nodded. "He said he was working with some partners. He didn't give names, but I saw him meeting with 2 other men once. They were at the old workshop on the east side of town. I didn't think anything of it at the time." "This is very important, Ronnie," Ibrahim said seriously. "Did Arfan ever mention Reno or Saray?" Ronnie nodded. "He said he was working with some partners. He didn't give names, but I saw him meeting with 2 other men once. They were at the old workshop on the east side of town. I didn't think anything of it at the time." "This is very important, Ronnie," Ibrahim said seriously. "Did you receive any threats? Did anyone try to prevent you from talking about what you knew?" Ronnie's eyes widened. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "About a week before they found the bodies, I started getting phone calls from a number I didn't recognize. The voice was disguised, but they said, 'Don't interfere.' I was so scared I didn't tell anyone." Ibrahim immediately ordered protection for Ronnie. 2 of his most trusted scouts were assigned to guard her around the clock. He also arranged for her to be moved to a safe house away from her normal residence. Whatever else happened, he couldn't allow any harm to come to a key witness. With Ronnie's testimony providing a crucial link between Arfan and the crime, Ibrahim felt confident enough to begin planning arrests. But he knew they needed to be strategic. Reno, Arfan, and Saray were all potentially dangerous, and any operation to apprehend them would need to be carefully coordinated. Ibrahim called a meeting of his senior scouts to plan the operation. They spread out a map of the town and surrounding area, marking the locations where each suspect was known to frequent. Arfan had a workshop where he did metalwork. Reno lived in a small apartment near the market. Saray was the most elusive. He moved frequently and had no permanent address that they could identify. "We move simultaneously on all 3 targets," Ibrahim decided. "If we grab one, the others might run. I want teams ready to move on my signal, full tactical gear, backup plans in place, and clear communication channels. We do this right, or we don't do it at all." The raids were scheduled for the following morning, just before dawn. Ibrahim believed in the element of surprise, and he knew that the early morning hours, when most people were still asleep, would give his teams the best chance of success. The night before the operation, Ibrahim couldn't sleep. He went over the plans again and again, looking for any weakness, any oversight that could compromise the mission. His scouts were well-trained and professional, but there was always an element of risk when confronting potentially violent criminals. He prayed that no one would be hurt, not his men, and not any innocent bystanders who might be caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Ibrahim's teams moved into position. Each unit had been assigned a specific target and given clear instructions. They would approach quietly, secure the perimeter, and then make their entry. If possible, they would take the suspects alive and unharmed, but if the suspects resisted or tried to flee, the scouts were authorized to use necessary force. Ibrahim positioned himself at the command center, a mobile unit from which he could monitor all 3 operations simultaneously. Radio communications crackled as teams reported their readiness. The tension was palpable as the final seconds counted down to the beginning of the operation. "All units," Ibrahim spoke clearly into his radio, "you are authorized to proceed. Move now." the simultaneous raids on the three suspects' locations unfolded with military precision. Ibrahim's teams had been training for exactly this kind of operation for years, and their professionalism was evident in every movement. At Arfan's workshop, the team approached silently through the early morning mist. The building was a simple metal structure on the edge of town, surrounded by piles of scrap metal and old machinery. The scouts could see light coming from inside, indicating that someone was present despite the early hour. The team leader signaled for his men to take up positions around the building, securing all possible exits. Then, with a sharp hand gesture, he ordered the breach. Two scouts moved quickly to the main door, tested it, and found it unlocked. They pushed it open and entered swiftly, weapons at the ready. "Arfan, military police, don't move," the team leader shouted. Inside, Arfan was standing at a workbench, his hands covered in grease. For a moment he stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock. Then he made a sudden movement toward a door at the back of the workshop. But the scouts were faster. Two men intercepted him before he could take more than a few steps, pinning his arms behind his back and forcing him to the ground. "Search him," the team leader ordered, "and secure the premises. I want every document, every scrap of paper, every phone, everything collected as evidence." At Reno's apartment, the operation was equally swift. The scouts had approached the building from multiple directions, covering the front entrance, back exit, and windows. When they entered Reno's apartment, they found him still asleep in bed. The sight of armed military personnel in his bedroom left him too shocked to offer any resistance.
"Reno, you're under arrest for suspicion of murder," the team leader informed him, as scouts pulled him from his bed and handcuffed him. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." Reno's face went pale. I didn't mean," he started to say, but one of the scouts cut him off. "Save it for the interrogation," the scout said flatly. "Right now, you're coming with us." Traoré proved more difficult to locate. The intelligence on his whereabouts had been less certain, and the first location they checked, an abandoned warehouse where informants had reported seeing him, turned out to be empty. Ibrahim received this news with frustration but not surprise. Traoré had been the most careful of the three, always moving, never staying in one place too long. "Expand the search," Ibrahim ordered over the radio. "Check all known associates, all previous residences, every place he's been spotted in the last month. I want every scout on this. He can't have gone far." It took another 6 hours of intensive searching before Traoré was finally located. A tip from a local shopkeeper led scouts to a small boarding house on the outskirts of town. This time Ibrahim himself accompanied the team, wanting to personally oversee the capture of this final suspect. The boarding house was a run-down building with peeling paint and a sagging roof. The scouts surrounded it quietly, and Ibrahim approached the landlord to inquire which room Traoré was occupying. The landlord, clearly frightened by the military presence, pointed to a room on the second floor. The team moved up the stairs carefully, their boots making almost no sound on the creaking steps. When they reached Traoré's door, they paused, listening. Inside, they could hear movement. Someone was definitely present. On Ibrahim's signal, two scouts kicked open the door and rushed inside. Traoré was there, sitting at a small table with a phone in his hand. When he saw the scouts, he threw the phone at them and lunged for the window. But he never made it. The scouts tackled him to the ground, quickly subduing him despite his desperate struggles. "It's over, Traoré," Ibrahim said, entering the room once the suspect had been secured. "It's all over." With all three primary suspects in custody, Ibrahim ordered them transported to the regional detention facility where they could be properly interrogated. He also ordered a fourth sweep of all three locations, collecting every possible piece of evidence that might be relevant to the case. Back at the command center, Ibrahim reviewed the initial interrogation reports. Both Reno and Togar, another associate who had been picked up during the search for Traoré, had begun talking almost immediately once they realized the gravity of the situation. Their confessions painted a disturbing picture of premeditated murder motivated by a combination of financial disputes and personal revenge. According to their statements, Traoré had been the mastermind. He had convinced the others that Handra owed them money and had cheated them in various business dealings. Arfin had been brought in as the primary executor of the plan because of his physical strength and his connections to the family through Rani. Reno and Togar had served as accomplices, helping to carry out the actual murders and dispose of the bodies. The confessions were detailed and damning. The suspects described how they had waited until evening, knowing that Handra's family would be at home. They had forced their way into the house, overpowered Handra, and then systematically killed him, his wife, and his children. The unidentified fifth body in the well turned out to be an unfortunate neighbor who had stopped by at the wrong moment and had been killed to eliminate a witness. Ibrahim listened to these confessions with a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. Satisfaction because the case was coming together, the truth was emerging, and justice would be served. Disgust because of the cold-blooded nature of the crimes, the targeting of innocent children, and the utter lack of remorse shown by some of the suspects. "Continue the interrogations," Ibrahim instructed his team. "I want every detail. Where did they get the plastic bags? What tools did they use? How did they transport the bodies? I want a timeline of events that's so detailed and accurate that no defense attorney will be able to poke holes in it." Over the next several days, the investigation continued to deepen. Forensic evidence from the crime scene was matched to the suspects. Phone records confirmed that they had been in contact with each other around the time of the murders. Financial records showed the business disputes that had supposedly motivated the crime. And perhaps most importantly, Rani's testimony provided an independent witness account that corroborated key aspects of the suspect's confessions. Ibrahim worked closely with the prosecution team, ensuring that every piece of evidence was properly documented and prepared for court presentation. He knew that this case would attract significant public attention, and he wanted to make sure that there would be no mistakes, no technicalities that could allow the guilty to escape justice. As the investigation neared its completion, Ibrahim took a moment to visit the site of Handra's house. The property was quiet now, sealed off as a crime scene, but no longer under active guard. He stood there in the evening light, thinking about the family that had lived here, the children who had played in this yard, the dreams and hopes that had been so brutally extinguished. "We got them," he said quietly to himself. "I hope that brings you some peace, wherever you are." 3 months after the arrests, the trial began in the regional courthouse. The proceedings attracted intense public interest, with journalists traveling from across the country to cover what had become one of the most notorious murder cases in recent memory. The courthouse itself had to increase security significantly, with Ibrahim's scouts working alongside regular security personnel to manage the crowds and protect all participants in the trial. Ibrahim arrived early on the first day of the trial, personally overseeing the security arrangements. He wanted to ensure that nothing would disrupt the proceedings, that justice would have its day without interference or incident. His scouts were positioned at every entrance, every exit, every corridor of the courthouse. Their presence was meant to be reassuring, but also to send a clear message. This trial would be conducted fairly and without intimidation from any quarter. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. The gallery was packed with villagers from Kasapano, journalists, legal observers, and members of Handra's extended family. Among them was Maver, Handra's sister, who sat in the front row, her face a mask of controlled grief. She had traveled from another region to attend the trial, determined to see justice done for her brother and his family. The defendants were brought in under heavy guard. Sarai,
Arfan, Reno, and Togar were all present, each one looking markedly different from the men they had been at the time of their arrest. Months in detention had taken a toll. They looked thinner, older, haunted by what they had done and what awaited them. The presiding judge, a stern woman in her 60s with decades of experience on the bench, called the court to order. She reviewed the charges against each defendant. 4 counts of premeditated murder in the cases of Handra, Sulastri, and their 2 children, and 1 count of murder in the case of the unidentified neighbor. Additionally, there were charges of conspiracy to commit murder, illegal disposal of bodies, and various other related offenses. This court will hear evidence regarding crimes of the utmost seriousness, the judge stated. The charges allege the deliberate and planned murder of an entire family, including 2 innocent children. This court will conduct these proceedings with the gravity and careful attention that such charges demand. The prosecution began its case by presenting a comprehensive overview of the evidence. The lead prosecutor was a skilled attorney, known for his meticulous preparation and persuasive courtroom presence. He walked the jury through the timeline of events, starting with the business disputes that had initially brought the defendants into conflict with Handra. The evidence will show, the prosecutor said in his opening statement, that this was not a crime of passion, not a spontaneous act of violence. This was a calculated, planned execution of an entire family. The defendants discussed their plan, prepared for it, acquired the materials they needed, and then carried it out with chilling efficiency. And when they were done, when they had taken the lives of 4 innocent people, including 2 children who couldn't have been more than 6 and 8 years old, they tried to hide their crimes by disposing of the bodies in a well. Over the following weeks, the prosecution methodically built its case. Forensic experts testified about the evidence collected from the crime scene, explaining how the blood patterns, fingerprints, and DNA evidence all pointed to the defendants. The medical examiner described the injuries sustained by each victim, making it clear that they had died violently, and in the case of the children, probably in terror. Phone records were presented showing communications between the defendants in the days leading up to the murders. Financial documents were introduced demonstrating the business disputes that had allegedly motivated the crime. And perhaps most dramatically, Ronnie took the stand as a prosecution witness. Ronnie's testimony was devastating for the defense. Speaking in a quiet but steady voice, she described how Arfan had approached her asking for information about Handra's schedule and habits. She explained that she had provided this information innocently, not knowing what it would be used for. When shown phone records of the threatening calls she had received after the murders, she broke down in tears. "I never meant to help them hurt anyone. If I had known, if I had even suspected, I would never have told them anything." The defense attorneys tried to discredit Ronnie's testimony, suggesting that she had been more involved in the conspiracy than she was admitting. But Ibrahim had ensured that Ronnie's original statement to his scouts had been properly documented, and the consistency of her story over multiple interviews made her a credible witness. Cooperate with the prosecution in exchange for reduced sentences, gave detailed accounts of the planning and execution of the murders. Their testimony largely aligned with the physical evidence and with each other's statements, lending credibility to their accounts. Reno described how Sakurai had first proposed the idea, painting Handra as a cheat who deserved to be punished. "He said Handra had stolen from us, that he owed us money," Reno testified. "At first we just talked about scaring him, making him pay what he owed. But Sakurai kept pushing for more. He said Handra would never pay willingly, that we had to take more extreme measures." Togar's testimony corroborated this account. "Sakurai was the leader," he said. "He planned everything. He told us when to act, what to do. Arfan carried out most of the actual killings, but we were all there, We all participated. When Arfan took the stand, his testimony was more defiant. While he admitted to being present during the murders, he tried to minimize his own role, suggesting that he had been coerced by Sakurai and had acted under duress. The prosecution demolished this defense by presenting evidence of Arfan's extensive planning activities, including his purchase of the plastic bags used to dispose of the bodies and his reconnaissance visits to Handra's property in the weeks before the murders. Sakurai himself refused to testify, exercising his right to remain silent. His defense attorney argued that the prosecution's case was based largely on the uncorroborated testimony of accomplices and that there was reasonable doubt about his client's role as the alleged mastermind. But the weight of evidence against Sakurai was overwhelming. Phone records, financial documents, and the testimony of multiple witnesses all pointed to him as the primary instigator of the crimes. Throughout the trial, Ibrahim maintained constant vigilance over the security arrangements. His scouts rotated in shifts, ensuring that someone was always monitoring every access point to the courthouse. There were moments of tension, protesters outside demanding justice, media scrums that threatened to overwhelm the court steps, and even anonymous threats phoned into the courthouse. But Abraham's preparation and his team's professionalism ensured that the trial proceeded without major incident. As the trial entered its final week, the prosecution called its last witness, Mavor, Handra's sister. Abraham had met with her several times during the investigation, and he knew that her testimony would be powerful. What he didn't expect was how it would transform the entire trajectory of the proceedings. Mavor took the stand with quiet dignity. She was a woman in her 40s, a schoolteacher from a neighboring region, and her composed demeanor commanded immediate respect from everyone in the courtroom. The prosecutor asked her to describe her relationship with her brother and his family. "Handra was my younger brother," Mavor said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "He was a good man, a devoted father. His children were everything to him. I remember visiting them just a month before this happened. The children were so happy, so full of life. My nephew wanted to be a doctor. My niece loved to draw. They had their whole lives ahead of them." The courtroom was silent as Mavor spoke, many in the gallery wiping away their own tears. Then the prosecutor asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "What would you like to say to the men who killed your brother and his family?" Mavor turned to look directly at the defendants. For a long moment she simply stared at them, and they could not meet her gaze. Then she spoke, and her words would resonate far beyond that courtroom. "I see you sitting there," she said softly. "I see the fear in your eyes, the shame, and I want you to know that I do not forgive you for what you did. How could I? You took away the people I loved most in this world. You murdered children who never harmed anyone." The defendants shifted uncomfortably, some looking down at the floor. "But," Mavor continued, "I also want you to know that I will not let hatred consume me. I will not become like you. The path of revenge, the path of endless anger, that path only leads to more darkness, more pain, more death. My brother would not have wanted that. He believed in peace, in reconciliation, in the possibility of redemption." She paused, gathering her strength. "So, while I cannot forgive you, I can pray for you. I can hope that somehow, in whatever years remain to you, you will find genuine remorse, genuine understanding of the horror you have inflicted. And I can work to ensure that my brother's memory is honored not with more violence, but with light, with education, with community, with hope for a better future." The impact of Mavor's testimony was profound. Even the judge seemed moved, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. In the gallery, Abraham saw people openly weeping. And in that moment, he understood that this trial was about more than just punishment. It was about confronting the darkness that human beings are capable of and choosing, despite everything, to reach for something better. After 4 weeks of testimony and 3 days of jury deliberation, the verdict was delivered. The courtroom was packed to capacity, with people standing in the aisles and crowding around the doors. Abraham's scouts maintained order, but even they seemed affected by the tension in the air. The judge called the court to order, and the jury foreman stood to deliver the verdicts. One by one, the decisions were read out. For Sakurai, the mastermind, guilty on all counts. The jury recommended the death penalty. For Arfan, the primary executor, guilty on all counts. The jury recommended life imprisonment without possibility of parole. For Reno and Togar, the accomplices, guilty on all counts. The jury recommended 20 years imprisonment each, with credit for their cooperation with the investigation. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of cheers and cries. Some celebrated the justice that had been served, while others wept for the victims who could never be brought back. Ibrahim watched it all from his position near the door, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. The judge allowed a few moments for the commotion to subside, then delivered her own statement. "These crimes," she said, "represent some of the most heinous acts that can be committed against fellow human beings. The deliberate murder of an entire family, including 2 innocent children, shakes the very foundation of our society's values and our collective sense of security." She looked at each defendant in turn. "You will have ample time in prison to contemplate what you have done. I hope that time brings you to a genuine understanding of the pain and suffering you have caused, not just to your victims, but to their families, to your own families, and to your community." Then, surprisingly, she addressed the gallery. "I want to commend Mavor, the sister of the deceased, for her remarkable testimony. In the face of unimaginable grief, she chose to speak of hope rather than hatred. This is not weakness. It is the greatest strength a human being can display. It is the only path forward from tragedies like this one." After the sentencing, Ibrahim accompanied Mavor back to Kasapano. During the journey, they spoke at length about her plans for honoring her brother's memory. Mavor explained that she wanted to establish something permanent in the village, something that would serve as both a memorial and a force for positive change. "I've been thinking about this for months," she told Ibrahim. "I want to create a community center, a place where children can learn, where families can gather, where people can find support and hope. I want to call it the House of Light, in memory of my brother and his family." Ibrahim was immediately supportive. "I'll help however I can," he promised. "My team and I will ensure the center is safe, that it has the resources it needs. This is exactly the kind of project that can help heal a community." 3 months after the trial concluded, construction began on the House of Light in Kasapano. The site chosen was near the center of the village, on a plot of land donated by a local family who had been moved by Mavor's testimony. The design was modest but functional: a main building with classrooms, a library, a community meeting space, and a small garden area where children could play. Ibrahim assigned several of his scouts to provide security during the construction phase and to help coordinate the project. He had been so impressed by Mavor's vision that he had personally contributed a significant portion of his own savings to the building fund. Other donations poured in from across the region, people who had followed the trial in the news and been inspired by Mavor's message of hope over hatred. The garden became the centerpiece of the memorial. Mavor worked with local horticulturists to select plants that would thrive in the local climate and provide year-round beauty. White frangipani trees were planted around the perimeter, their fragrant white flowers symbolizing peace and renewal. In the center of the garden, a simple stone memorial was erected, bearing the names of Handra, Sulastri, and their 2 children, along with an inscription: "From darkness, light; from sorrow, hope; from death, life renewed." As the construction progressed, Ibrahim noticed a gradual change in Kasapano. The village, which had been gripped by fear and grief in the months following the murders, began to show signs of recovery. People started gathering at the construction site to watch the progress, to offer help, to discuss what programs the center might offer once it was complete. Children were particularly drawn to the site. They would peek through the construction fencing, imagining the day when they could attend classes there, check out books from the library, play in the garden. Their excitement was infectious, and it helped the adults remember that life goes on, that the future still holds promise even after tragedy. Ibrahim made it a point to visit the construction site daily when his duties allowed. He found something therapeutic about watching the building take shape, about seeing hope literally being built from the ground up. His scouts reported that the atmosphere in the village had shifted noticeably. While people hadn't forgotten what had happened, they were beginning to focus more on the future than on the past. 6 months after ground was broken, the House of Light officially opened. The dedication ceremony drew hundreds of people from Kasapano and surrounding villages. Government officials, community leaders, and ordinary citizens all gathered to celebrate this symbol of resilience and hope. Mavor gave the keynote speech at the dedication. Standing in front of the completed building, with the white frangipani trees in full bloom behind her, she addressed the crowd with the same quiet strength she had shown in the courtroom. "This building stands on soil that has known great sorrow, but it rises toward a sky that holds infinite possibility. My brother and his family cannot be brought back. Nothing can undo what was done to them. But we can choose what we do next. We can choose whether to let tragedy define us, or to let it transform us into something stronger, something better." She gestured to the building behind her. "This is more than just a community center. It's a statement of faith. Faith in the goodness that persists even after evil has done its worst. Faith in the capacity of human beings to heal, to forgive, to hope. Every child who learns to read within these walls, every family that finds support here, every person who discovers that they are not alone in their struggles, each one is a victory against the darkness that tried to overwhelm us." Ibrahim, standing off to the side with his scouts, felt pride surge through him. This was why he did this work, not just to catch criminals and solve cases, but to protect the possibility of moments like this, moments when communities came together, when light pushed back against darkness, when people chose hope over despair. After Mavor finished speaking, children from the village performed songs and dances they had prepared for the occasion. Their voices rang out clear and joyful, a powerful counterpoint to the sorrow that had once filled Kasapano. As Ibrahim watched them, he thought about the children who had been murdered, about the songs they would never sing, the dances they would never dance, the futures they would never experience. But he also thought about these children before him now, alive and hopeful, carrying forward the promise of a better tomorrow. In the months following the opening of the House of Light, its impact extended far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. The center became a hub of activity in Kasapano, hosting not just educational programs for children, but also adult literacy classes, vocational training workshops, counseling services, and community gatherings. Ibrahim continued to take a personal interest in the center's success. He arranged for some of his retired military colleagues to teach practical skills like first aid, basic self-defense, and emergency preparedness. His active scouts volunteered their time to provide security training for village watch groups, helping communities learn how to protect themselves and when to call for professional help. One of the most successful programs at the House of Light was the Peace Education curriculum developed by Mavor herself. Drawing on her experience as a teacher and her painful journey through grief and toward healing, she created a course that taught children and adults about conflict resolution, the roots of violence, and the power of forgiveness. Violence doesn't come from nowhere, Mavor would tell her students. It grows from seeds of resentment, misunderstanding, and unresolved conflict. If we can learn to address these problems when they're small, we can prevent them from growing into something terrible. The curriculum included real-world case studies, role-playing exercises, and discussions about difficult topics like revenge, justice, and mercy. It wasn't easy material, and some community members initially objected, arguing that it was too heavy for children to handle. But Mavor stood firm. Children already know that the world contains darkness, she argued. They lived through what happened here. What they need is not protection from reality, but tools to navigate it. They need to know that they have choices, that they don't have to respond to hurt with more hurt. The results spoke for themselves. Students who went through the Peace Education program showed marked improvements in their ability to manage conflicts with peers. Playground fights decreased. Bullying incidents dropped. Teachers reported that children were more likely to talk through their problems rather than resort to aggression. But perhaps the most powerful impact was on the adults. Parents who attended the evening sessions often found themselves confronting their own attitudes about revenge, justice, and forgiveness. Many admitted that if they had been in Mavor's position, they would have demanded the harshest possible punishment for all the defendants, would have spent the rest of their lives consumed by hatred and desire for revenge. What Mavor has done, one parent said during a community meeting, is show us there's another way. She hasn't betrayed her brother's memory by choosing not to hate. She's honored it by creating something that will live on long after we're all gone. Ibrahim observed these changes with deep satisfaction. He had spent his entire career fighting crime and pursuing justice, and he believed deeply in the importance of that work. But he was also coming to understand that true justice involved more than just catching criminals and securing convictions. It involved healing communities, preventing future crimes, and creating conditions where people could live without fear. The success of the House of Light began to attract attention from other communities. Leaders from villages across the region visited Kasapano to see the center for themselves and to speak with Mavor about her vision. Some went home and started their own versions of the House of Light, adapting the model to their local needs and circumstances. A regional network of peace education centers gradually emerged, with the original House of Light serving as the flagship and training ground. Mavor found herself traveling frequently to help other communities establish their own centers, to train teachers in the peace education curriculum, and to share her own story of choosing hope over hatred. Ibrahim supported these expansion efforts however he could. He helped ensure security for Mavor during her travels, connected communities with resources and expertise, and used his military contacts to advocate for government support for the Peace Education Network. He had become, in a sense, Mavor's partner in this work,
complementing her focus on education and healing with his own expertise in security and protection. 2 years after the trial, Ibrahim returned to Kasapano for the anniversary commemoration at the House of Light. The center had continued to thrive, expanding its programs and serving an ever larger number of people. The white frangipani trees in the memorial garden had grown tall and full, their fragrant blossoms filling the air with a sweet, peaceful scent. The anniversary event was both solemn and celebratory. There was a memorial service in the morning where the names of the victims were read aloud and candles were lit in their memory. But there was also a festival in the afternoon, with music, food, games for children, and displays showcasing the work being done at the center. Ibrahim walked through the garden slowly, taking time to read the memorial stone again. He thought about the investigation that had consumed so many months of his life, about the painstaking work of gathering evidence, conducting surveillance, coordinating arrests. He thought about the moment when the bodies were first pulled from the well, about the grief and horror he had seen on people's faces. But he also thought about what had come after, about Maver's testimony in court, about the House of Light rising from the ashes of tragedy, about children laughing and learning in spaces dedicated to peace, about communities choosing healing over hatred. During the evening program, Maver asked Ibrahim to say a few words. He was reluctant at first. Public speaking had never been his strength, and he preferred to work behind the scenes. But Maver insisted, and eventually he agreed. Standing before the assembled crowd, Ibrahim spoke from the heart. When I first came to Kasapano 2 years ago, I came as an investigator. My job was to find out what happened, to catch those responsible, to gather evidence that would stand up in court. I did that job to the best of my ability, and I'm proud of the professionalism my team showed throughout that investigation. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But what I learned here, what Maver taught me, is that my job didn't end when the criminals were convicted. True security, true peace, requires more than just effective law enforcement. It requires building communities where people feel valued, where conflicts can be resolved before they escalate to violence, where even those who have done terrible things can be seen as human beings capable of change. Ibrahim gestured to the House of Light behind him. This building represents a kind of justice that goes beyond the courtroom. It's a justice that acknowledges the pain of the past but refuses to be trapped there. It's a justice that says we will honor the dead not by perpetuating cycles of revenge, but by creating something beautiful and life-giving in their memory. The crowd applauded, and Ibrahim saw tears in many eyes. Maver approached and embraced him, whispering, "Thank you. Thank you for everything you've done and everything you continue to do." Later that evening, as the festival wound down and people began heading home, Ibrahim walked one more time through the memorial garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The white frangipani flowers seemed to glow in the fading light, and the air was filled with their sweet fragrance. A young boy, perhaps 8 years old, approached Ibrahim shyly. "Are you Commander Tarakar?" asked the boy. "I am. What's your name?" "My name is Samuel. My teacher says you're the one who caught the bad men who hurt Handra's family." "I had a lot of help, but yes, my team and I investigated what happened and made sure the people responsible faced justice." Samuel looked up at him with serious eyes. "Will you teach me to be brave like you?
I want to protect people when I grow up." Ibrahim knelt down to be at eye level with the boy. Being brave doesn't just mean catching criminals. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose not to fight, to forgive someone who hurt you, to build something good instead of destroying something bad. Do you understand? Samuel thought about this for a moment, then nodded. Like Miss Maver? She was brave when she said she wouldn't hate the men who killed her brother. Exactly like Miss Maver. That kind of bravery, the bravery to heal instead of hurt, to hope instead of despair, that's the most important kind there is. As Samuel ran off to rejoin his family, Ibrahim felt a profound sense of peace. His work was far from over. There would always be criminals to catch, investigations to conduct, justice to pursue. But he now understood that his work was part of something larger, something more meaningful than just solving individual cases. 5 years after the murders that had shaken Kasapano to its core, the village had been transformed. The House of Light had become a central institution in community life, and the peace education network it had spawned now included centers in over 30 villages across the region. Ibrahim had continued his work as a military commander, but he had also taken on an unofficial role as an advisor to the peace education movement. He traveled frequently to speak at new centers, to train security personnel in community-oriented approaches, and to help communities develop strategies for preventing violence before it occurred. Maver had become a nationally recognized figure, her work attracting attention from international peace organizations and human rights groups. She had been offered positions with several NGOs, but she had turned them all down, preferring to continue her grassroots work in the communities that needed it most.
The criminals who had committed the murders remained in prison. Traoré's death sentence had been commuted to life imprisonment after an appeal, a decision that Mavor had actually supported. "Killing him won't bring my brother back," she had said. "Let him live with what he's done. Let him have time to truly understand the suffering he caused. That's a more meaningful form of justice than execution." Some of the prisoners had begun to show genuine signs of remorse. Reno, in particular, had been participating in restorative justice programs offered through the prison system. He had written letters to Mavor, expressing his deep regret for his actions and asking if there was any way he could make amends. Mavor had not responded, but she had kept the letters, reading them occasionally to remind herself of the complexity of human nature, the capacity for both terrible evil and genuine transformation. The anniversary events at the House of Light had become annual traditions, drawing larger crowds each year. They served multiple purposes, honoring the memory of those who had been killed, celebrating the positive changes in the community, and recommitting to the ongoing work of building peace. At the 5th anniversary event, a special dedication was held for an expansion of the memorial garden. New sections had been added to honor all victims of violence in the region, creating a space where families could come to remember loved ones lost to crime, conflict, or tragedy. The expansion included a meditation area with benches surrounding a reflecting pool, a place where people could sit quietly and contemplate. Ibrahim attended the dedication with mixed feelings. He was proud of what Casa Burino had become, proud of the work that continued to emanate from the House of Light, but he also carried the weight of all the cases he hadn't solved, all the victims whose families were still waiting for justice, all the crimes he hadn't been able to prevent. During the ceremony, a surprising thing happened. Several young people who had grown up attending programs at the House of Light announced their intention to pursue careers in law enforcement, social work, and conflict resolution. One young woman, barely 20 years old, gave an impassioned speech about her commitment to carrying forward the legacy of peace that Mavor had established. "I was 10 years old when the murders happened. I remember the fear, the way everyone in the village felt like we would never be safe again. But then Miss Mavor came, and she built this place, and she taught us that we didn't have to let violence define us. Now, I want to do the same thing for others. I want to help communities heal, to prevent violence before it happens, to show people that there's always a path forward, even in the darkest times." Ibrahim listened to this young woman and felt something shift inside him. For years, he had measured his success by arrests made, cases solved, criminals convicted. Those things remained important, but he now understood that the truest measure of success was something different: the creation of a next generation that believed in peace, that had the tools to build it, and that was committed to spreading its light as far as possible. After the ceremony, Ibrahim and Mavor walked together through the expanded memorial garden. They moved slowly, reading the names inscribed on the new memorial stones, reflecting on all the lives that had been touched by violence and all the families that continued to grieve. "Do you ever wonder if it's enough?" Mavor asked quietly. "All this work we do, all these programs and centers and speeches, is it actually making a difference? Are we really preventing violence, or are we just responding to it after the fact?" Ibrahim thought carefully before responding. "I think," he said slowly, "that we're doing both. We're responding to past violence by creating spaces for healing. But we're also preventing future violence by teaching people different ways of handling conflict, by giving them alternatives to revenge and hatred. Will we prevent all violence? No. Human nature is too complex, and the roots of violence run too deep. But every person we reach, every child who learns that there are options other than fighting, that's a victory." Mavor nodded, seeming to take comfort from his words. They continued walking until they reached the original memorial stone, the one bearing the names of Handra and his family. White frangipani blossoms had fallen around its base, creating a natural offering. "I still miss them every day," Mavor said softly. "Not a day goes by that I don't think about my brother, about his wife, about those beautiful children. And I still feel angry sometimes, angry at the men who killed them, angry at a world where such things can happen." "That's natural," Ibrahim said. "Grief doesn't have a timeline, and anger is a normal response to injustice." "But," Mavor continued, "I also feel grateful. Grateful that their deaths led to something meaningful, something that has helped so many people. If I had chosen the path of revenge, if I had let hatred consume me, none of this would exist." She gestured to the garden around them, to the house of light visible in the distance. "My brother's life was cut short, but his legacy, the legacy we've built in his memory, that will continue long after we're gone." As the sun set over Casapano, casting long shadows across the memorial garden, Abraham and Mavor stood in companionable silence. Around them, the sounds of the village at peace drifted on the evening air. Children playing, families sharing meals, friends laughing together. The scars of violence remained, but they no longer defined this place. The white frangipani trees rustled gently in the breeze, their blossoms glowing in the fading light. Abraham thought about all the cases he had worked over his long career, all the criminals he had caught, all the investigations he had led. But he knew that the Casapano case would always hold a special place in his heart, not because of the investigation itself, but because of what came after. Justice, he had learned, was not just about punishment. It was also about healing, about restoration, about creating conditions where communities could thrive without fear. And hope, real, lasting hope, came not from the absence of darkness, but from the decision to light a candle in the midst of it. The House of Light would continue its work for generations to come, a permanent reminder that even after the worst tragedies, human beings have the capacity to choose life over death, hope over despair, and light over darkness. And that, Abraham reflected, was a legacy worth protecting, worth nurturing, worth everything he had given to this case and everything he would continue to give in the years ahead. As night fell over Casapano, the lights came on inside the House of Light, spilling warm illumination into the memorial garden. It was a fitting image, light pushing back the darkness, hope persisting despite everything, life renewing itself after death. And in that moment, Abraham knew with absolute certainty that Handra's family, wherever they were, would be proud of what had been built in their memory. The investigation that had begun with death had led ultimately to life, and that was the most perfect justice of all. The end.